So what we're going to do today, today's class, I want to be a lot of activity for all of you. We're going to have opportunities to get into breakout rooms. And during that time, some of you might prefer to work by yourself, and that's also fine. You don't have to go to a breakout room. But if I know some students like to do that and have an opportunity to talk to each other. So pretty quickly after we get started, I'm going to have some activities where we can take what we're learning about vocabulary and go put it to use on some activities I have for you today. So I'm hoping we get a lot of time here for you to interact with each other and to share ideas with me, because the focus today is going to be on vocabulary. And it would, of course, be really boring if we just went through a long list of vocabulary. We're not going to do that. What I want to do today is a couple of things. So we're going to treat this less like a lecture or a class and more like a workshop to work with vocabulary and to think about IELTS Task 1 essays and how to respond to them. We're going to focus on vocabulary, but I imagine that we will have chances to talk about Task 1 questions generally, and that's totally fine to do that. If you have questions about Task 1 and the things that we're looking at, we can use this time for that as well. But I want to present to you a few resources that if you haven't found them yet, you should definitely use them, and point you in the direction of some tips that will help you to improve your Task 1 vocabulary and your Task 1 essays. Vocabulary is a huge part of Task 1. Having the words to talk about those visuals that they show you is a big challenge for many students. So the goal here today is to give you some ideas and some resources to help you improve your Task 1 vocabulary. Okay, so before I jump in, does anyone have any questions? Okay, for those of you who just joined, I think I forgot to do this at the beginning. My name is Elliot. I am the IELTS expert at Magoosh. So Magoosh student, so I think almost everybody here is a Magoosh student. So you've heard my voice on the videos and the explanations and all those things. And for those of you who are not Magoosh, and if anybody out there is not a Magoosh student, I'm the teacher, the IELTS teacher for the company Magoosh, that we help people with test preparation, not just for IELTS, but for GRE and other exams that you might take for grad school or for immigration and things like that. Okay, so let's get started here. I didn't see any questions come in, so let's get going. All right. In general, what we want, one of the points to make about what we're going to look at today is that your goal for preparing in vocabulary on Task 1 is to make sure that you are doing a couple of things and studying a number of very specific things that Task 1 asks you to write about and describe. In general, your goal, if you look up here at the top on the slide, is to make sure that your vocabulary use is varied. Okay, what does that mean, to have varied vocabulary? Varied vocabulary means that you are not using the same words over and over and over again. Okay, you're not relying on the same word to communicate one idea. Okay, so this is something that comes up a lot. I see this very often, and it's understandable in Magoosh essays that I see from students. I'll often have a comment that your vocabulary is redundant. That's a word you might know about, redundant. Redundant means that it's you're using the same words or phrases over and over and over again. Okay, so that's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because it shows the grader, the person grading your essay, that maybe you don't have the vocabulary to exchange words or to use different words to communicate the same idea. Maybe you're not able to paraphrase ideas from the question, so you have to use the same words from the question or the visual in your response. And that's a problem. And they mark you down for that. Okay, that comes off of your vocabulary score if they notice that you have a limited vocabulary. So you need to have, your goal should be to have lots of words to describe similar ideas. Okay, so we'll look at this in a moment when we look at some sample essays. But if you've got a simple graph or a chart that you're writing about, and it shows a trend, something is increasing, okay? Something is going up. Well, how many different ways can you describe a change or a trend where something is increasing or going up? If you use the word increase over and over and over again, that's a problem, okay? So that's what we're talking about having varied language. You're trying to avoid redundancy. The second point here in this little sentence up here, you need to make sure your words are accurate. So you need to be using the precise words, the words that show that, if we look them up in the dictionary, you used it exactly the way it was meant to be used. So you need to have a wide range of words that you're familiar with so that you can use them accurately. If you use a word inaccurately, it's not quite the meaning that it's intended to be. That's another thing that they bring your score down with, where you're using words slightly incorrectly or maybe very incorrectly, okay? And then the last thing is the word nuanced. Nuanced, I'm not sure that might be a word you're familiar with or not. When things are nuanced, so it's related to accurate, but nuanced means they have very small, the meaning that you have for it is extremely accurate and very precise. So for example, I'm drinking some coffee right now, and I made this coffee about 30 minutes ago. And so when I first made it, the coffee was quite hot. In fact, so hot that I couldn't drink it very comfortably. I had to let it sit. But now I've kind of put it on the edge of my desk, and it's been sitting there for a while, and it's not hot anymore. But what is it? Well, it's not cold. If I drink it, it's not going to burn my mouth anymore. So it's not extremely hot. So what is it? It's in between. If you have nuanced vocabulary, you can describe things that have very precise meanings like this. Well, what word would I use? We have a phrase called being lukewarm. Lukewarm is what I would call it. What is lukewarm? Well, it's not hot, it's not cold, it's in between. And your ability to use vocabulary in these precise ways is what they're looking for, to have the vocabulary to be nuanced. All right, now there are no shortcuts to this. There are no shortcuts. You need to be studying vocabulary regularly, and you need to try to build your vocabulary in a way that is going to allow you to have these very nuanced, accurate, and varied meanings. Okay, but you're not just studying anything. You want to have a focus. And that's what these are the ideas. If you look up on the PowerPoint, these are the ideas of the main things that you need to build your vocabulary to be able to describe. Things like dates and time, trends, okay, especially trends over time, changes over time, processes, right? There's some task one prompts that give you like processes or a sequence of events that are happening. You need to be able to describe those, steps to doing something, and then numbers and percentages. These are the big categories you need to build your vocabulary in, okay? Let's see, I wanna pause here for a moment. Kunta, I saw you put something in the chat. You put the word timid with a question mark. Oh, I think I know what you put that when I was talking about the coffee. I think the word you were thinking of, I'll type it in the chat. The word, a very nuanced word, is tepid. Tepid. Tepid is a word that means kind of not extremely hot, not cold. It's a good synonym of lukewarm. I'll put that here so you can see what that phrase looks like. Lukewarm. Those two are synonyms. Good. I like that. Okay. So let's get going here. Here's what I want to do. I'm just going to talk for a couple more minutes, then we're going to get started trying to apply some things that we take a look at here in just a moment. I've got some resources that I want to share, and I want to highlight some things in them. So I'll highlight things on the screen, but I'll also share these resources. So can you look in the chat? I've shared a blog post in the chat. And I'll give you a moment to open that. I hope everybody can open that okay? Yes, I see some yeses. Good. Okay. Yep. All right. So maybe you've seen this. I think we put links to this in some of our videos in Magoosh, and that's fine. But I want to encourage you to take advantage of this resource. And I'll just go ahead and put the other one in here too. This resource, the blog post I just put a link to is specifically, obviously very specifically devoted to task 1, academic task 1. And I'm going to put a link here for you to see. This is a more general vocabulary PDF for IELTS that we've created. And on that one, if you scroll down to page 15, right? Yeah, if you go down to, I guess it's not 15. Yeah, it is 15. Page number 15, there begins a discussion on vocabulary that's very similar to the blog post. There's some crossover between the two. But there are some lists of categorized vocabulary that you should be familiar with. This is not it's not like we've put everything here you could ever want to have, but it's a great place to start and a great place to begin mastering some language that you can use to help improve your IELTS writing, your task 1 writing. Okay, so on the screen, on the PowerPoint, you've got those documents open, and in a moment, I'm going to ask you to use them a little bit. But I just want to point out a few things. So the way we've organized them, if you look on the PowerPoint screen, we've got them in categories, categories that are similar to that last slide that I had, where you can come in and when you need to try to describe some visuals for your task 1 visuals, you can try to locate some lists of words that might be relevant to that particular kind of thing you're trying to describe. If your visual wants you to make a comparison of something, or if your visual asks you to describe some increases or decreases in things, this would be a place to begin looking for words that you can use and avoid redundancy and to try to be accurate about what you're describing. Okay, so you just pointing the table of contents here for as a way that you could sort of, when you're practicing your task 1 essays, you could have this open and you could use it as a resource to help you build vocabulary. Or possibly after you've attempted to write a task 1 essay in the 20-minute time frame that you're allowed to have for those essays, maybe when you're going back and revising or checking what you wrote within that 20 minutes, you could use vocabulary lists like these to think about making improvements on what you wrote. I think actually that's a very powerful way to study for IELTS writing, especially for those of you out there who only have a few days or weeks or maybe a month to prepare for the test. You need to be, if that's you, you absolutely need to be practicing writing task 1 and task 2 within time limits, strict time limits. You need to get that timing down. But then after you've written your essays, I usually advise students, go ahead and put them away. Don't just look at them immediately. Put them away maybe for a day when your mind is fresh again and you can come back to them with things like these resources, like these vocabulary resources or other materials you're using to study for the essay section, and really look closely at your own writing and think about ways you could improve it. That's an absolutely fantastic way to develop your skills over time. Okay, let's just keep going through very quickly here. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to spend more time with you all doing some activities with this stuff. Um, so so just looking at an example of some of the material that's here on the blog post that I shared, you know, just beyond even then the trends and the numbers and the dates and the very specific categories of things, there are some ideas here for phrases that you can use to introduce something, right? So in your introductory section, that first paragraph that you're writing, some ideas there, some good phrases. Getting very specific then later in the vocabulary PDF about things like adverbs that you can use, okay? So these are things that you can use to provide nuance, right? So very fine pointed ideas around verbs that you're using. That's an excellent thing to get in the habit of looking at. How can I make my actions, my verbs, more nuanced by adding certain adverbs? And here's a nice list to get you started related to words that are kind of advanced. They would be rewarded because they're not simple words that, you know, IELTS would count as just a basic vocabulary that anyone should know. Many of these are, except a couple, I mean, slowly, everybody knows slowly, but the rest of these are probably a little more advanced and would be rewarded if you could use them accurately here. Okay, so lists of things that you can use. More lists here. Some ideas about how to talk about trends, changes. Okay, and we've got some verbs and some nouns that would be useful, right? Remember when I talked earlier about describing how something, maybe you've got a trend that you need to write about on a graph where something is increasing, okay? Well, you don't want to use the word increase. That's the third word here on my rise idea, okay? So increase is one, but there are many other things. Now, these are not exact synonyms, and if you're not familiar with them, you should look up the meanings of them or ask if we have time to ask to talk about them today. We certainly can, but you should be able to sort of begin learning and trying to use some of these alternatives so that when you have to describe a trend or a change where something is increasing, you've got more than just that word to use to describe it, okay? Okay, so I'll stay here. I've said a lot, and so far, you know, we've just been sort of looking at these resources and giving you ideas about how you should be preparing and practicing for these task one essays where you're building your vocabulary and using resources like these two that I've shared so far. What questions do you have before I'm going to give you an activity here to begin trying to use some of these things, and we can talk specifically about some task one essays. But any questions at this point before I move on to that part of the workshop here? Anyone? You can unmute yourself, or you can put a question in the chat. And if nobody has anything, then we'll just keep moving.
Can you repeat how can we practice the writing task one again?
Yeah, sure. So my advice for you, so this is specific advice for folks who are typically in the situation that Magoosh students are in. Most Magoosh students do not have, let's say, a writing coach or a tutor. You are trying to improve your writing with the help of Magoosh and things like essay grading and all those things in our lessons. But then, you know, most students are kind of working on their own to improve their writing. And the question is, well, how can I do that? What's the best way for me to practice and make improvements if I don't have a teacher looking over everything that I do? So I think what I found to be successful with students, and the thing that I find often leads to the best and the fastest results for students, is if they practice in a very specific way. You practice essays, task 1 and task 2, with the time limits that you're supposed to have. Timing is so critical on the IELTS writing. You know, I'll speak personally. When I was in graduate school writing papers, I was not a fast writer at all. I liked to take my time. I liked to just put ideas on the page without thinking about them much and let them sit there, and then I'd go back and revise them. And I think many people write that way. That's kind of a natural way to write. But on IELTS, they don't give you that opportunity. You have a short time. And when I took the GRE, I never took I didn't have to take the IELTS or TOEFL exam because I'm a native speaker, but I did take the GRE, which is very similar kind of exercises. And I found that to be quite stressful and challenging because of the timing. So you need to practice the timing, and that's very important for you to use a stopwatch and a clock to time yourself. But then the advice is that after you finished writing, put the essay away. Don't your mind, you've been looking at it, thinking about it for an hour, and you're not thinking freshly about what you just wrote. Put it away for a day or two, and then come back to it and look at it with new and fresh eyes and think about how you could improve it. Spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes trying to revise your essay. And you should, for task 1, you should use resources like these PDFs, the vocabulary resources, to think about how you can make very specific changes to your vocabulary. Maybe you notice that you're using the same word over and over and over again throughout your essay. It's redundant. That's an opportunity to try to put in new words and to learn to make improvements on what you've written. And I think just delaying it a couple of days, coming back with fresh eyes where you can sit down for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, an hour, whatever you have, and really revise and think through how to make improvements. That often will lead to improved writing the next time you have to write a task 1 or task 2 essay. Okay. Juan, I see you raised your hand. What's your question?
Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah.
Hi, Elliot. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I would like to ask, or no, first of all, to share with you something that I've been doing when I'm practicing, and is one of the most challenging parts of this task 1 and task 2 in writing for me is to get like the ideas, to complete the words and that. So what I try to do is to write it in the way it comes, having like the structure, of course, but to have the ideas and to write in like in a fast way.
Yeah.
After that, what I do is to review what I've write, and of course, I start to correct that kind of errors, like what you said, for example, words that are repeated in all the paragraph. So I start to correct, and of course to add other phrases, examples. But my first step is like to bring the ideas and to put it on the paragraph.
Yep.
So I would like to ask you if you what do you think about that? Is a good strategy, or it would be better if I start writing but in a properly way since the beginning?
Okay. What's your plan? So on the actual exam day, so when you're taking the IELTS exam, I just want to understand what you're planning to do. Are you planning on that day to write really quickly and then go back and revise it? Or is it just a way? Oh, that's okay. That's the plan.
Yeah, to use, for example, the 20 minutes of task 1 to spend, I don't know, the first 5 minutes writing down, bringing the ideas, because that's challenging for me to have the ideas to complete the words.
I think it's great. I think if that works for you, I think that's great. Are you planning to take the computer version? Yeah,
computer.
on the paper test, I don't think that would be possible, right? You'd have to be erasing and doing all kinds of things to like change things around. On the computer test, that becomes possible. And it makes a lot of sense to me. If you've got ideas and you're just writing, and that's a way that you can get your ideas on the page, and then you edit it from there. If that's your process that helps you to get to that final place, then do it. I think it's a great idea. Some students want to spend 2 or 3 minutes looking at the visuals and making a kind of plan and outline. And that's just a different style. And it sounds like to me that would not work very well for you, because then you might get stuck, or you might get behind and lose too much time. And then suddenly you should be on task 2 and you're still on task 1, and then you've got a big mess during the test. So I think do it, but practice that a lot. If that's your strategy, then every time you practice task 1, do that and get better and better and faster at it. I would hope that over a little bit of time, you would get even better at writing what looks like the final version of your essay, right? So that with more practice and more editing and revising before the test, you actually, on the first try, you can get closer to that final product that you're planning to submit for that essay. Yeah, good. I think it's a great suggestion. Yeah. That's actually a good, does anyone else have a question? These are great questions. I want to take them if people have them, but if not, then we're going to move on to something that's actually very similar to what Juan was just talking about. A little exercise. Anyone? Okay, let's do this. Let's move on. I'm going to share, let's see, we'll start with this one. I'm going to share something in the chat here. And this is a link to an official IELTS question that they publish for free on their website. So these are publicly available to students, and they've got a lot of stuff there. If you haven't gone to the official IELTS website and looked at their sample questions, I highly advise you to take advantage of those. I wish they put more up there for people, but that's okay. They put some, and they're a good way to just get extra practice with the test. So here's what I want. I want you to open up that link, and we've got a task 1 bar chart there when you open it up. And what I'd like to do first, let's do this individually first, and then after we do one quick round, then I'm going to put you into some small groups, and these are optional small groups, but we'll look at a second prompt in just a moment. And here's what I'd like for you. And by the way, I think this is related to what Juan was just talking about. This is a good activity for developing your ability to write clearly about task 1 prompts, what we're about to do. So without writing, so the writing piece sometimes gets, and it sounds like even for Juan who just shared, it sounds like the writing piece sometimes just getting your words out in sentences can be kind of its own problem, right? That being able to write quickly is one kind of problem, but then getting ideas about what you want to say about the visuals for task 1 is a separate problem, right? You're not quite sure what you should write about. So it's a good practice activity to spend some time looking at task 1 prompts, and don't worry about writing immediately. Create a plan, and your plan should be to take a look at what's there about what you're supposed to write about, and see what you can do to identify 2 or 3 of the main points that you would say. So what is most interesting about these visuals? What are the key points on the bar chart here that we're looking at together that you would want to write about, especially the details that you would write about in paragraphs 3 or potentially 4 if you have 2 detail paragraphs. But then also, of course, these 2 or 3 things that you find that are most significant, those would be the things that you need to describe generally in your second paragraph, your overview paragraph for your response, right? So being able to look at these prompts and answer this question is a skill that you need to get faster and faster and faster at so that you can do it quickly on the exam day. But if it's difficult for you to get these ideas, you should slow down as you're preparing for task one and practice this analysis and your ability to identify what the major things are in the visual. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to look over this prompt. And what I want you to do is to try to identify what would you pull out of this? What are the most significant things in this visual that we should write about if we respond to this essay? Okay. And then I would like for you to turn over to those vocabulary resources that I provided a moment ago. And you don't need, you could pull out some specific words, or you could just let me know, well, what categories of words could you use in order to respond to this particular prompt with a different vocabulary, with a variety of vocabulary. So you're gonna have to have these two things open, the prompt and then looking over at some of those vocabulary resources there, and try to decide what language, what words would be useful for you with this particular question, okay? Does that make sense? The directions are up here on the screen. And let's not do breakout rooms now. I'm just gonna start a clock. Let's say I'm gonna give everybody 5 minutes to look over this on your own, the question, and to do some thinking. And you can just write some notes on your page or whatever. And after 5 minutes, then we'll come back together and talk about it as a group, okay? Make sense? All right, I see, yes, good. Okay, go ahead, I'll start the clock now. Okay, that's been 5 minutes. Is anybody need more time? Raise your hand or put it in the chat if you'd like another minute. That's fine. Everybody good? Okay, let's see. I'm gonna, oh yeah, there we go. Can everybody see the chart on the screen now? Yep. Is that sharing? Can somebody give me a yes?
Yes, yes.
Great, thank you.
We can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I would like to hear from you. What are the major things that we ought to report about first? Before we get into vocabulary, let's just identify what are the possible things that you ought to write about in this particular visual. What would you pull out? Anyone? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, Rashmi, I see your hand there. Why don't you go ahead?
It seems like part-time education was more popular than the full-time education.
Okay, so part-time education was more popular than full-time education. Great, yes, by a lot, right? So
Yes.
yeah, in both cases. So as a general trend, we absolutely need to point out, probably in our overview paragraph, that part-time education for all students, for everyone, was more popular. Great, I love it. Okay, Juan, I see your hand. What would you then? What's another thing we ought to point out?
Another thing is how female education has been increasing over the years.
Okay, and
even overcoming male education. Yeah.
Describe that. How has female education changed according to this chart over the years? What are the major ways that you would want to point out in this particular essay? Yeah. Juan, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. I would use, like, I don't know, the increase. That would be like the word that I would use.
Excellent, I love it.
That has been like continuously. I don't know if I'm right or not, but that's the idea, no?
Yeah.
Year by year, or in this case, decades, have been like constantly, maybe increasing over the.
Okay, I like that. Now this is where, perfect. This is what we're talking about, and how to use these resources and to think about vocabulary. So if we're going to talk about a steady increase, if something's been increasing steadily, I would probably use that to describe male full-time education, right? Because look, it's kind of a little bit here, a little more there, but it's still kind of, just as a general trend, it's steady. But how about this jump? Look at that, for females from 1970s to 1980s. That's not a steady rise. What is that? Anybody have a word for that? What would you say?
Surge.
Surge.
I would like to point out something.
Okay. Go ahead. I don't know who said that.
Can I talk?
Yes, go ahead. Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to point out, like, one of the points which I'm having right now. Coming to part-time education, unlike males, we could see a clear progression in the females, whereas in the males there was a decline and then a short rise.
Good. Yes. Good. Okay. I like that. I'm going to try to keep both things in mind just in a moment. So I just want to get back quickly to what we were just talking about then. And then I like that point that you just made. So first of all, thinking about female education here down at the bottom, I like, Rywin suggested the word surge, or another suggestion is that the full-time education increased abruptly. Okay, great. Surge is great. That makes sense to me. There was a surge in female education from 1970 to 1980. Yes, it surged up compared to almost any other thing. I think we could also describe that for part-time education here, right? there were surges in full-time education from 1970s to 1980s, and then another surge in part-time education for females from 1980 to 1990. Great. That's a good way to describe that kind of increase as a surge. I want to be careful with the word abruptly. Okay, I like that suggestion, but abruptly means that something happened fast, quickly. And the problem we might have with abruptly is, well, we're not looking at quick things here. We're looking at changes that happen over 10 years. So I don't think this is maybe an abrupt change. It is a surge in the sense that over this time period, now we see these big increases, right? But I'm not sure abrupt is going to work, because abrupt indicates that it's very quick and it happened in a short period of time. Okay, good. The meeting ended abruptly. Rashmi suggested, yes, the meeting ended abruptly. That would be good. So if I quit the meeting right now, before 10 o'clock my time, you could say, yes, Elliot ended the meeting abruptly. That's a good way to use that word. Good. Okay. Now, I don't know who was talking. It didn't show me on the screen whose voice it was, but there was also a really beautiful sentence about male part-time education. About now, I wish, could the person who shared that, I don't know who that was, could you share your sentence again? How did you describe this sort of dip and then rise again? Oh, okay.
I hope you were talking about me.
Yes, I am. I think I am.
So I will read out the sentence once again.
Yeah.
Coming to part-time education, unlike males, we could see a clear progression in the females, whereas in the males there was a decline and then a short rise.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. Yes. So we can see a clear progression both in full-time and part-time education for women. Progression, I like that. A progression from lower numbers to higher numbers. But for males, by contrast, for males, there was a dip and then a rise here. Good. I love it. Good. Anything else? Yes.
Can I say one more thing?
Of course.
I haven't made a sentence yet, but it's like it just popped up in my mind like all of a sudden. So in all the parameters we could see a decline and then a rise. No, we could see that, but whereas in the 1980 and 81 period, we could see that the graph has not yet changed. Both for the males and females, it is same. I'm talking about part-time education, 1980. So
yeah, in 1980s,
both are same.
Yeah, they're similar. They're very
Is that a good observation which I can put it?
That's okay. I don't know if that. So we've mentioned a bunch of things so far. I mean, absolutely, the difference between part-time and full-time education has to be in your overview paragraph. That is the biggest thing that we can see here. And we've already mentioned a few contrasting trends. So that would be one that I think is, you could pull that out, but I think if we're trying to make comparisons in particular, which I would suggest that you do for this particular visual, then, that piece of it, you could mention it, and that could be a good thing to write about, especially in your detail paragraphs that come below, like paragraph 3 or 4. Good. I would focus in my overview paragraph number 2, on the kinds of trends that you notice. So this increase for females, the sort of decrease but then slight increase in part-time education for males, it would be something that I would probably highlight as the general trends that I would want to focus on in paragraph 2. Okay. But yeah, you could absolutely pull out that detail, and I think it would be a good comparison to make.
So my point is,
yeah.
So we could see that there is a decline and then there is an decline. So we could all see that, but this is so weird that the both are same, like,
Yeah.
so it was like a spot on for me. That's why I would like to mention whether I can put it in the essay or not.
Yep. Sure. Sure. And you can. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure. Okay. All right. I'm looking at the time here. Oh boy. We're running out of time. Yeah, okay. So, and I apologize. That's always my fault. If we're running out of time, it's because things are going longer than expected. I'm still getting used to teaching on Zoom. Actually, I haven't done that at all ever. Many people have been doing that during the pandemic, but this is my first opportunity. So I appreciate everyone's patience here. We're working out how to do this the best way possible. Let's do this. Since we have about 10 minutes left, and we can go a little bit over, that's fine if there are questions at the end. Here's what I'd like to do. So here is a sample essay. Someone wrote about the visuals that we just looked at, okay? So I'd like to give you a moment to read through this quickly, okay? This essay, I believe, and they tell us here, this is from the official site. Yeah, this received a band score 5. And I like this essay for this class because I think the vocabulary could really be improved, okay? So I'd like to give you a moment to read through. You should be able to read through this in 2 or 3 minutes. And then let's finish the class out with a discussion of, okay, how could this student make some changes to their vocabulary using potentially the resources that we've looked at the beginning of class? How could they make improvements to their vocabulary in this essay? Let's try to just focus on vocabulary now, because I think there are some other things, other problems that we could also point out. Okay. So go ahead. I'm going to give you, let's see, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to read this, to think about it, and then let's finish the class sharing ideas about how to improve this essay. Okay. I'll also, I'll put a link to this in the chat so you can pull it up on your screen. There's a link to what I'm looking at here. Okay, go ahead, read through. Somebody needs a link here. Let me. Oops. Okay, there's the link. Sorry. I sent the link as a private message. I apologize. Hopefully everybody can get the link now.
Elliot,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
In this task 1 and it applies to task 2, when we write the number, which is the best option, to write literally the number or to write the word?
Where are you looking?
No, for example,
general?
when the student mentioned 1970, for example,
Yeah. Right.
We should write literally the number how
Yes.
he did or she did in this
Yes.
example, or we should write literally the word, 1970,
Yeah.
or let's thinking in smaller numbers. No,
Yeah.
for example, let's say 3. I should write the word or the number.
That's usually the distinction people make, is for numbers larger than 10, and definitely for dates, and very large numbers. You can write the number itself. Some people prefer to spell out the number if it's like 10 or fewer, as a general kind of rule. IELTS is not going to count you down for using numbers, written or spelled. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Definitely for dates, you should, for years like 1970, write out the number for sure. I mean, that some big numbers are going to start getting really long, and that becomes a problem. So I would write the numbers for dates for sure. Yeah. And the Rashmi's question, can we write 1970s? Yeah, you can. Yes, with the S. Yeah, in the 1970s with an S. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, we're running out of time quickly, and I didn't give you a lot of time to look at the paragraph, but let's get back on and just finish out here. Can you help me understand, if you were this student's teacher and you had to focus on vocabulary and say, okay, I want you to study this kind of vocabulary, or I think you should make this kind of improvement in your essay, what would you say? Yeah, Eric, I see your hand raised. What's something you would point out for this particular student?
I think there is an overuse of the word increase and decrease.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I'm sure everybody noticed that too. That is, we started the class talking about redundant use of words, and this student needs to find some more vocabulary to talk about increases and decreases. Yes, because that word was used too often and it was not used very precisely, right? So we're talking about things going up and down. That's all increase and decrease means. But we know from looking at the visual that increases happened quickly, slowly, dramatically. They soared. There were big increases, small decreases, big decreases. If you're going to score well on IELTS Task 1, you need to be able to describe those increases and decreases in a more nuanced way. And so this student really needs to gain some more vocabulary for describing that. Excellent. Excellent. Good point there. Let me point out also, while we're talking about increasing and decrease, do you see how this is not a vocabulary point, but I love grammar. I love teaching about grammar, and that used to be when I was in class, when I was a classroom teacher in college, that's what I focused on most. And I noticed that this student also has a grammar problem with the word decreased. Yeah. They're using passive voice, right? Was decreased, but that should not be there. That be verb does not make sense. The passive sense of this does not increase. If it were passive voice, that means that somebody made it go down, right? That somebody decreased it, right? But that's not what's happening. We're not reporting about something that someone did to make these numbers go up or down. It is just an increase or a decrease, okay? And so this student has a problem with that grammatical point too, and they make it throughout the essay, okay? So that would be another thing. Good. I see some comments in. Yeah, Juan, decreased by, yes, you would take the be verb out and say decreased by this or that. Or if you would say decreased by if it's by a specific number, like it decreased by 1,000 or 2,000 people, something like that. Yeah, good. Kunta, you have a comment there. What about paragraphs? Yes, this student needs some paragraphs. Okay, but that's a separate non-vocabulary issue, but absolutely, this student needs some paragraphs there. Who was talking there? Somebody was about to say something.
Yep. Yeah, it's Caroline. I was gonna say for the word studying, it was again redundant. So this person could have used other words to describe studying. So enrolled in classes, registered for classes, took classes,
Excellent.
words like that.
Yes, yes, yes. This student needed some different ways to talk about people being in school, right? And what you do when you're in school. Studying is one way to talk about that. But what you suggested there, also excellent. The students were enrolling in college or enrolling in school, things like that. Those kinds of things would help this student to talk about studying with different vocabulary. Absolutely.
I would like to point out one thing.
Yes, please.
So from the below fifth line, so he was saying that if compare men and women as you see, so can we use that thing like as you see? So from the below fifth line.
Fifth line.
Yeah, if compare men and from the below fifth line, not from the above.
4, 5. Okay. Here.
If compare, it is starting with if compare. Below,
Okay.
below.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking the
So
wrong.
he was, yeah, there.
Yeah. If compare men and women. Yeah.
So if compare men and so he was saying that as you see, can we use that? Can we refer to like somebody like as you see?
No.
Maybe he was referring to the examiner like as you see.
Don't. If I were the student, this teacher, I would say don't do that. No. Don't, as you see is not. Yeah. As you see is very informal, and you no. I would not say that. So this sentence has a grammatical problem. If we compare, or if one compares men and women in 1970, that's how I would say that. Okay, so take out the as you see. Don't need that and should not use that.
So we should not. It should not be like we are talking to second person, right? Should be always third person. Is that true?
Yeah. Yes. Don't use the third person. Use general. Use one, or if you can use we if that works. So you want it to be impersonal. You should have. It's usually best to avoid pronouns if you can do it in these essays. You want it to be a report, and it is perfectly fine when it's appropriate to use passive voice structures, because that helps you to remove the subject. In these reports, you can use passive voice. It's the problem this student has with they used passive voice on increased when they, that doesn't make sense grammatically. Okay, but if you're in a position where you're thinking about using a pronoun, if you can use passive voice there, that's a way to make it sound very formal and to remove the subject there. That's a little bit of a grammar issue that is getting outside of what we're talking about here, but that would be a suggestion I would have. Rashmi asked a great question here about, is using full-time and part-time again and again, is that too redundant? That is a little bit of a separate issue than some of the other redundancies we've looked at. And the reason why is that it is hard to describe accurately this category of the chart without talking about full-time and part-time students. So that is not something that I think one should really focus on replacing, because you kind of need to use that terminology in order to describe the chart accurately. So that's not an area of focus, I think. I mean, and I'm trying to even think about what alternatives you could use there that would not actually. So the danger is if you're trying to use synonyms, but if they don't really clearly replace the category of the chart that we see here, then it's going to be, your discussion is going to be more confusing because the reader's not going to know potentially exactly what you're talking about. So I think I would probably keep that. I think I would probably not replace those in this essay. Yeah. Caroline, I see your question.
Yes, I have a question. And this is with regards to details in paragraph, also related to vocabulary. what would you say with respect to commenting on specific data information? So here we're seeing twice as much, 3 times as many. Does the IELTS examiner account for the accuracy of that information? Or would that be only if it's very clear? Like if you actually trace the bar and it's like a 50%, but then when you provide estimates, do they check that as well?
No, and yes.
Okay.
So looking at the question here,
Mhm.
I mean, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at this first one. You can see my mouse there, I hope, on
Right.
1970 for males. And okay, between 0 and 200, what do you think this is? Like, what would you say? Would
I'd
you
say it's about half of that, 100.
maybe it's 100? So
Mhm.
I would, if you're going to report numbers, and you should, especially in paragraphs 3 and 4, where you should pull out details and describe them in more depth. I
Mhm.
would, in this one, I would mention numbers specifically, but I would use sort of hedging words like, well, about approximately 100. Let's see, what are the categories here? 1,000. Yeah. So 100,000 males were in full-time education in the 1970s, right? In 1970, 70.
Mhm.
Yeah. So using
Mhm.
that approximately, about, making it clear that we don't have the precise number, but we can make an estimate based on the visual information that's here. Okay. So using some of
Mhm.
those adverbs is definitely a good idea when you're trying to pull out numbers, but you're not exactly sure what the number is precisely. Okay. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. But if we were to say for what is it now? Part-time,
Mhm.
the first bar for for part-time for male, yeah. So if
Yeah.
I were to report say 800,000, would I be marked incorrect for the inaccuracy of that when it's actually
Oh,
1,000?
if you are inaccurate, yes. If you're
Mhm.
clearly inaccurate,
Okay.
then yes, that will be that they will mark you down because
Mhm.
it appears that you did not read or understand the visual correctly. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yes, you don't you you uh, you want to avoid inaccurate.
Mhm.
So the idea of using kind of approximate language, so approximately, about, nearly, adverbs like that before you report a number,
Mhm.
that is accurate, right? That is what we see on this chart. And here we see, and I think we could very confidently say this number here because it's exactly on that line, right? The males
Mhm.
70 and part-time education. So yeah, you want to avoid inaccurate statements, but where necessary, you just need to make approximate announcements about what numbers are there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Rashmi, good question. Can we replace approximately with roughly? Yes, yes, that's a good use of roughly. Roughly and approximately in front of a number mean the same thing, and that's a great IELTS word to use. They'll like to see you use that. So yes, please use that. Okay, we're out of.
Elliot,
Go ahead.
I would like,
Go ahead.
yeah, I would like to take like few recommendations from you. So, like before we start this report, should we have to spare some time, like how you gave us the assignment right now? Take some time. You gave us 5 minutes, and
Mhm.
we looked at the graph and we took some ideas. Then should we start the report?
Mhm.
Like how it is. And one more thing is, should we write the report first or after the essay? What would you say?
Ooh, good questions. For your first question, um, if I'm working with each of you individually, my first question for all of you would be, when is your test? Okay, how much time do you have before you take the test? If you've got a month or more, then I would suggest that you right now you take your time. When you get to any question, task 1 or task 2, take a little bit extra time to work on planning out what you want to say. That's okay. As you progress towards your exam day, your goal ought to be able to plan your responses more quickly every week. Set a goal. So I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to plan my essay this week, but next week I'm going to strictly cut that down to 7 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever. You're getting faster and faster and faster. So you don't want to just plan essays quickly if you don't have to, without thinking about them and without really putting a lot of thought into what you're doing. That's not going to help you very much. If you start to decrease the time over time, then by exam day, for task 1, you should hopefully be able to plan out what you want to say in 2 to 3 minutes and then start writing. And for task 2, no more than 5 minutes is what I suggest. If you can do it faster than that and just start writing more quickly after taking a look at your visual and picking out the important things, then you should absolutely do that. Time is so limited on the writing test that you need to not spend more time planning than you absolutely need, okay? But it's a skill. It's a skill you can practice. And again, if you've got lots of time before your test, give yourself more time, but focus on decreasing that amount of planning time so that by the time the week that you're taking the test, as you're practicing, you're down to the goal of no more than 2 or 3 minutes for task 1 and no more than 5 minutes for task 2 in planning. Okay. Now, everybody's a little bit different with this. I was talking about this in other classes I've been in recently. Some students don't need to plan at all. They get in there, they write, then they want to come back and revise what they wrote after they've written it. That's another strategy, and that's okay. Juan was talking about doing that kind of thing earlier. If that works better for you, then try it. And you probably won't know if that works better for you until you try it. But that's another approach you can use that will work for some folks, okay, is to kind of skip the planning mostly and then just get in there and write and then revise what you wrote at the end. That could also work, okay? About whether you take task 2 or task 1 first, that's a complicated question. Task 2 is worth more points. It's more important, right? Because it counts more towards your score. For that reason, some people like to begin with task 2 and really make sure they get it down. But you do run into a danger of getting too deeply into your task 2 and not finishing anything on your task 1. I tend to tell students that, I think it makes some sense to begin with task 1, give yourself a strict time limit, do as well as you can and get as much as you can. And then wherever you are at 20 minutes, you have to stop there and spend the rest of your time on your task 2 and focus on that and make sure that that looks good. It would be better to have an incomplete task 1 than an incomplete task 2. So some students want to begin with task 2, make sure that that's done, and then move quickly. I don't know that there's a clear answer there. I would suggest that you try either one and see what you can do. But you need to finish both if you can. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you really need to do your best to get them both on the page before that hour is up, and that's really hard to do. Okay, good. We are out of time for today's class. I really want to thank everybody for participating in this. I really liked all the participation here, and I'm going to continue thinking. I want to keep getting more participation in these classes as we go. So we've got some more coming up, and if you come, I really appreciate all of the contributions you're making here. We've got Shreya, you've got one last question here. Is there any way we can practice writing task 1 and task 2 from the prompts and get it reviewed by me? We've got the essay grading feature. Unfortunately, I am so busy right now planning these classes and other changes that we're making to improve Magoosh IELTS for the students right now. That's sort of my main job, is to work on planning the things that we're trying to do to improve the site that I unfortunately don't have time to grade students' essays. I wish I could do that, but I can't offer that right now. So anyway, do use the essay grading feature that we have. And when you get your feedback, if you have questions about it or whatever, you should write back in and let us know what your questions are so that we can answer those for you. Okay. Okay. Thank you all. I see your comments here. I really appreciate all your contributions here, and I look forward to seeing you all in future classes. So thank you very much. I will send recordings. I'm going to send, like I mentioned at the beginning of class, I think not everybody was here. I'm going to send recordings for yesterday's class out to everyone who is registered for yesterday's class. I'll send that out today. And then this recording will probably be available for folks tomorrow. So you can look for your email, and I'll send this out to you then with all these materials that we looked at during class. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody. Nice to see you. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.